Hello, I'm Scott Thompson, and welcome to After 10. The G20 Leaders Summit in St. Petersburg, Russia this week was watched with keen interest by all the world. On today's After 10, we take a closer look at the issues that were discussed by the world leaders and President Park Geun-hye's agenda during the summit. World leaders from 20 different nations gathered in St. Petersburg for the G20 Leaders Summit. The summit marks President Park Geun-hye's first multilateral diplomatic event since taking office. Under the theme of boosting economic growth and job creation, Korea is acting as a mediator between advanced nations that are considering an exit strategy and emerging nations that are facing financial crisis. We analyze the summit results and remaining diplomatic challenges facing the Park Geun-hye administration. And we are joined today by Professor Kim Tae-hyun of Jungang University. Thank you very much for being on the show.
Good evening. Thank you for having me.
Now, the G20 summit in Russia this week was President Park Geun-hye's first multilateral diplomatic event since taking office. What is your overall assessment of this year's summit?
All right. President Park Geun-hye has a few bilateral summit diplomacy with a few very important countries like United States and China. And there she showed her extraordinary kind of master of diplomacy. And this is the very first multilateral diplomacy, and bilateral diplomacy and multilateral diplomacy is a little bit different. It's kind of a performance in front of many people. Its overall character and charisma or charmingness is more important than bilateral meetings. In bilateral meetings, it is more like personal bonds and ties are important. In multilateral, the characters is more important. And I think she showed her characters superbly to the world audience. So I think she has done it and doing very well so far.
And President Park's global image is rather high right now. She gave an interview with a Russian media outlet which lasted for about 20 minutes. That's right. Exceptional. That doesn't happen very often. Why do you think her global image is so very high right now?
And I think most of all, her is being praised by her performance in dealing with North Korea. She came to power and became inaugurated in February amidst very hostile and belligerent gesture by North Korea. North Korea at the time was even threatening a nuclear war, but still she didn't blink, but came down and pulled down North Korea into dialogue and finally made a breakthrough, which long stalled Kaesong Industrial Park and so on. So her style and her performances and her gut as the leader of a very important country in the world has impressed a lot. And I think that's why Russian public were interested in her and having her interview for 20 minutes and so on. So I'm very glad with that.
In talking about the improvement in inter-Korean relations recently, what sort of message do you think President Park is giving to the rest of the world, and what are they taking from that?
She has, her motto is what I call the trust politic. The key to the trust politic is consistency and predictability. And she had her own philosophy. She has her own agenda, which is very well structured. And she is, by sticking to that agenda and belief, her policy so far has been consistent and predictable. That led to North Koreans that in certain respects, South Korea's responses in this way. In certain ways, South Koreans won't follow North Korea's lead and so on. So, I mean, predictability has been the key, and it has been very instrumental to the breakthrough in inter-Korean stalemate so far.
At the G20 summit in Russia this week, the theme was the growth of the global economy and the creation of quality jobs. Which issue do you think should have taken front and center at this year's summit?
Well, the world economy, G20 itself as a summit meeting was established after the global economic crisis in 2008. After that, economic crises were really sporadic here and there and everywhere, hurting people around the world in terms of economic difficulties, growth, unemployment, and so on. So G20 so far has provided a kind of engine providing some stability in the world economy. Now, I think there is no pending economic crisis at the moment, but overall, it has to heal people who are suffering from past crises and so on by creating better economic performances and more jobs and so on. So growth and employment is a proper theme for these conferences.
You spoke about the expansion of the G20 that happened in 2008 from the G7 at that time. Yeah. It's been recognized since that time as really the best economic cooperation forum in the world. However, on another hand, there are some who say that the forum is losing some of its clout right now. Do you think that this year's summit could serve perhaps as a turning point for that?
Oh, it depends. It depends. I'm going to explain it two ways. The first, yes, G20 was created in 2008 in urgency. The world as a whole was feeling an acute sense of crisis, so there was a kind of momentum pushing 20th largest economy in the world, which covers over 80% of the world economy. And that provided a kind of momentum to the G20. So far it had held 8 meetings, including the one in Korea in 2010, where Korea performed superbly. Then economic crises were not just global, but here and there, and sporadic, so people's sense is kind of became immune to such sense of crisis, and they may be a little bit disappointed that G20 itself did not provide any kind of direct remedies for those economic crises. But as of now, I mean, G20 is the biggest forum. I mean, another dimension of the difficulty that G20 may having facing is that it has a forum of 20 countries. The more the number is, the harder to have a kind of concurrent solutions out of it. But now the world is facing another possibility of crisis, not really crisis, but economic difficulties. They're saying that the United States is going to end its stimulus measures by collecting more money from the market, so border resolve. And so it may put some shocks around the world economies. And so, I mean, the world is needing some kind of coordinated measures to whatever economic shock that may stem from, let's say, crisis in the United. I mean, at the end was still stimulus measures in the United States, possible economic crisis in India, maybe in China, and so on. So still we need coordinated measures to handle those issues, and G20 so far is the best and proven measure to handle those kind of challenges.
Korea often has a unique role at forums like this, serving as somewhat of a mediator. You mentioned this between advanced nations and emerging nations. Why is that, and what are some achievements so far that have been made in that particular role?
Okay, South Korea is playing that role because of two factors. The first is Korea is really squarely located in the middle of those advanced economies and developing economies. That is one position. The other one is South Korea's fast economic growth. We had past experiences of being underdeveloped and developing countries. So we know what developing countries need, and we know what problems that developing countries are facing now today. So we can link the concerns of developed countries as well as concerns of developing countries. That is very good. At the same time, ever since previous government, Lee government, South Korea has tried to play the role in the name of global Korea. So we are not gonna just stick to our narrow self-national interests, but we are gonna work for the betterment of global interest, because the world is so interdependent today. The world economy is so globalized today. In this world, we cannot just pursue our narrow national self-interest, but by pursuing global interest at the same time, we can pursue our national interests. And I think so far, South Korea has shown that by example. So that makes other countries look up to Korea's role as that. And developed countries will count on South Korea's role for that. So I hope that kind of role continues.
And this is perhaps what Russian President Vladimir Putin was thinking about when he asked President Park Geun-hye to deliver a lead speech at the G20 Summit. Why do you think she was selected to do that? I mean,
just as you mentioned, so we discussed that the South Korea's special role in the G20, and also I think Russia may have a special interest in South Korea as well. Russia economy has been struggling in recent years, although once Russia was the large part of the Soviet Union, which was one of the two superpowers, but it has been struggling with the economy. And also Russia has been relying on, let's say, oils and natural gas resources, but so Russia has been pursuing some kind of economic cooperation with South Korea on those energy sectors. And it was stalled recent years, a month. And I think Russia is trying to rejuvenate the economic ties with South Korea. And Russia also have very political as well as diplomatic interest in Northeast Asian side. So, I mean, having Korea, which is, I mean, China, Japan, United States is too big, kind of burdensome to the eyes of Russians, but Korea is more friendly and more workable, more partner-like country. So that's probably why he asked President Park Geun-hye to play that kind of leading role there.
And in looking at her remarks, what stood out to you? What do you think was the most significant part of her speech?
Disciplines and responsibilities to both parts for the developed countries and developing countries. In recent years, in financial crisis in European countries, let's say as the world economy becomes globalized and interdependent, and world politics has become democratized, a big danger is a kind of a populist sentiment among politicians. They would like to vote from the people through very generous expenditure, public expenditure that will lead to debt in government, fiscal plans, and so on. So both developed countries and developed countries and developing countries, they need disciplines in those financial policies, fiscal policies. I think she was emphasizing that, and also she was emphasizing the very fact that the world economy is so globalized and interdependent that no nation can make its national policy without affecting other countries, regardless of your country is big or small. So she is asking both developing and developed countries to pay attention to the possibility that their policy will have some impact, either positive or negative impact on other countries. So I think by saying that, I like it. I mean, she was showing really the leadership capabilities, the capacity to the world.
Bilateral meetings were also held on the sidelines of the summit. Let's start with the summit with Russian President Vladimir Putin. How would you assess Korea-Russia relations right now?
Yes, so Korea-Russia relations was kind of a disappointment so far. I mean, given the size of Russia, given the very abundant natural resources, and on the other hand, Korea lacks really those natural resources and so on. And also, Russia was very closely present in geopolitical needs in Northeast Asia, but somehow economic ties between Korea and Russia has not grown as fast as many people expected and anticipated. So I think through this kind of some meetings, we would like to jumpstart closer economic ties. And one really important factor there is North Korea. I don't know whether you remember that or not, but during a few years ago, Russian President and South Korean President Lee Myung-bak agreed to build natural gas pipelines through North Korea. And there is a North Korea issue, always a problem. North Korea is unpredictable. So that project would have changed the geopolitical as well as the geo-economic landscape of East Northeast importantly. But because North Korea was so unpredictable, that project was stalled. With kind of breakthrough in inter-Korean relations, if it goes well, then there is a potential for huge changes. So it is not just economic, but more important, geostrategic issues at stake. So, I mean, and also Russian part, a natural gas project was very important for them, but you know what it's called shale natural gas revolutions. That also put some strains in the Russian side. So all those kind of development will create, I hope, better atmosphere for the further negotiation between Russia and South Korea for those kind of energy projects.
Turning to the other bilateral summits that President Park held on the sidelines, Germany, Italy, Kazakhstan. What are some of the takeaways from those meetings that you can tell us about?
Well, looking inside South Korea, South Korean economy is facing some own problems. So the South Korean economy was dependent too much on big businesses like Samsung, Hyundai, and the small and medium-sized economy was not very prospering in Korea. We need them to have a solid footing of our economy itself. And Germany has provided a model for that kind of economies. German economy showed a very resilience and how can I say, robustness throughout European economic crisis. So we need a lot to learn from Germany, and we have a lot in common to cooperate in the area. Speaking about Italy, Italy was the first meeting with European countries, and I think Italy also has a kind of idea economies, or I would say creative economy. I mean, our President Park Geun-hye was emphasizing creative economy. Also, I would say the sentiments or the character between Italians and South Korea have something in common, you know. Don't you know Gangnam Style, that kind of thing?
Sure. There's a similarity you're saying.
Yeah,
okay.
Yes. And also Kazakhstan, I think Kazakhstan is very important. Kazakhstan is kind of plate linking the European part and Asian part of Eurasian continent. Whether Kazakhstan moves this way and that way, they change the world geostrategic balances. And also Kazakhstan is very rich in natural resources, which South Korea needs very badly. And also, I was paid a visit to Kazakhstan and found Korean presence there was very well established. So on one hand, we need to smooth out those kind of existing presences. At the same time, we need to boost for the possibility of cooperations between Korea and Kazakhstan. So Kazakhstan was very important in that regard.
Those are the summits that did take place.
Right.
Let's focus on the big one that didn't take place. The speculation leading up to the summit was whether President Park would meet with Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. It did not happen, as most of us expected. Looking at Korea-Japan relations right now, why do you think they are so frayed?
Bilateral relations between Japan and Korea has been solved during past a few years. And Korean public, Korean media, personally, I believe that the majority of those responsible belong to Japan's tendency toward more like right-wing policies, and with respect to some kind of comfort woman issues, history issues, and so on. But in the Japanese side, they believe that was particularly solved because of President Lee Myung-bak's visit to Dokdo Island, at the same time his comments on Japanese emperor. So, I mean, both sides put the fingers on the other side. Unless there is something worked out on their part, it's not going to be easy for any of these two countries to initiate, because if you initiate such kind of meetings, then you are kind of accepting the responsibility, finger pointing at you, and it's not going to be very popular domestically. So in that regard, we need more time and also behind the diplomacies, behind curtain diplomacies to sort out those kind of difficult situations and kind of simultaneous movements on both parts. That hasn't been done yet. I mean, President Park Geun-hye has been in office only about 6 months so far. Right. About 6 months, and I mean, there are 193 countries in the world in terms of membership to United Nations, and paying that attention to Japan alone won't take place that easy, so it's going to take more time.
The G20 Summit is now over. President Park now heads to Vietnam for a state visit. Why do you think she chose Vietnam following her state visits to the U.S., China, and now Russia? Why Vietnam?
Okay, I think Vietnam is a kind of a symbol or representative of Southeast Asian nations. You know, yeah, I told you that I have been in one of the Southeast Asian nations for 2 months. And for South Korea, means Korea is geopolitically surrounded by bigger countries like China, Russia, Japan, and politically the United States. So just located there, South Korea's diplomatic stance, maneuvering room is very narrow. We need to expand to other countries. And Southeast Asian nations, by building ASEAN, which is their own association, also geographically close to Korea, at the same time economically pretty well tied. So it's a natural outlet for diplomatic outlet for South Korea to search for, let's say, economic partners as well as diplomatic partners. So I mean, if you ask why Vietnam out of those 10 ASEAN countries, I have no answer. But Vietnam, we have some special ties with Vietnam, good and bad in the past. So selecting Vietnam as a representative countries of South Asia is a good one for the betterment of both bilateral relations and Korea-ASEAN relations as well.
Then what achievements do you expect to come out from President Park's visit to Vietnam?
Yeah, I mean, I hope that President Park Geun-hye is accompanied by unprecedented number of businesses. I mean, when President visits to other countries for the summit meetings, always business leaders are following him, or him. But this time, the size of economic missions are much bigger than United States and even China. And they say government was kind of soliciting applications from not just the big businesses, but the small and medium-sized economies, and they volunteered. So I once mentioned before when we speak to Germany that South Korea need to expand its economic basis, not just to big businesses, but small and medium-sized enterprises. So I mean, those businesses and enterprises will find opportunities in Vietnam and other South Asian nations. So that will be kind of expected, anticipated achievement in these bilateral meetings.
Looking ahead to the future of Korean diplomatic relations throughout the world, what role do you see President Park Geun-hye playing within the G20 structure moving forward over the next few years of her presidency?
Well, even in Korea, there is a widespread discourses and discussions about South Korea as the middle power. South Korea's foreign policy must be guided by what is called the middle power diplomacy. It can be defined by either by its status in the world power structures, or it can be defined by its roles, mediators, conveners, and so on. And it has been defined that way ever since Lee Myung-bak presidency, and it's going to be continued by Park Geun-hye presidencies. And she showed that she is very good at doing that kind of diplomacy. So I would expect that kind of role will be expanding quite rapidly in the coming 4 years. And so.
Professor Kim Tae-hyun, thank you very much for being on the show and providing your insights today. We appreciate it.
Thank you for inviting me to you. Thank you.
And thank you, as always, for watching. We'll see you next time, After 10.